Good morning, everybody. Do you remember when April Fools on the internet used to be fun, right? Like the Onion was funny and didn't seem like real life. And I mean, the satire was a thing that was funny. You could make fun of politicians and not be called a Nazi, right? I mean, like there were days where people could have disagreements but see the humor in it, right? It was, I mean, I think 2012 was the high point of maybe 2012, maybe 2011. I can't remember exactly. But Reddit did a whole thing like Team Purple and Team Magenta or something like that. I don't know, or Team Orange and Team Blue. Periwinkle rings a bell. And it was just crazy. It was just a weird, crazy thing to do that everybody kind of participated in. Big gaming magazines would put something out and all sorts of different people would participate. I mean, Google would do funny things. Like, I don't know, all sorts of stuff. It was a funny time to be on the internet. And maybe that speaks to, how far we've fallen since then, but you can't really do that stuff anymore. It's really, really kind of sad. But in not April Fool's joke news, here's Global News reporting your taxes, they're going up. Canada's carbon tax increasing April 1 despite coronavirus economic crunch. The federal carbon tax is increasing on April 1st despite the economic pain the coronavirus pandemic is having on Canadian workers and businesses. That scheduled rise from $20 per ton to $30 per ton is in keeping with the plan to raise it by $10 per ton each year until 2022. For consumers, that translates to roughly an extra 2.5 cents per liter of gasoline at the pumps. And because they're measuring it this way, and because it directly kind of does turn into that impacts the price of absolutely everything. Most things, as we've learned in the coronavirus crunch, and Justin Trudeau just realized, the other day, truckers are very, very important. A lot of our goods arrive on trucks. So it's really interesting that 2.5 cents per liter will impact the price of goods. Why? Because moving the goods costs more, right? And not to mention, wages going up, et cetera, et cetera. And that's not to say that that's bad. That's to say that, is this the best time to be raising taxes on a group of people who 2.5 cents per liter will move the needle on cost of food? And it already has. I mean, we watched this happen when this came into effect last year. People, experts were talking about the price of food through the summer being extra high because, conditions, growing conditions and tax conditions, et cetera, conditions. So is this the best time? Back to the article. The Prime Minister repeatedly refused to give a yes or no answer to whether the increase would go ahead during the days of recent questioning by journalists. So it looks like it is going ahead. And don't you just love when Justin Trudeau just doesn't answer the question? When you ask him something really like plain and straightforward and he just goes off on a tangent and nobody really knows what he's talking about other than him. Or he's answering a different question in his head. Or he's flipped it around, restated the question in a way that he can then answer it vaguely and not answer it at all, really. I used to do videos about that, and now it's just become so commonplace. It's just almost every time he talks, right? We did not pressure Jody Wilson-Raybould. Okay, so we pressured her, but it was for the greater good. It was for jobs. We'll do everything to protect Canadian jobs. CBC News is reporting Air Canada to lay off 16,500 employees amid pandemic-related flight cancellations. Air Canada will temporarily lay off 16,500 employees starting this week as the airline struggles with fallout from the COVID-19 pandemic, the Chinese coronavirus. Affects this Friday the layoffs of 15,200 unionized workers and 1,300 managers will last through April and May amid drastically reduced flight capacity from the Montreal-based airline. To furlough such a large portion of our employees is an extremely painful decision, but one we are required to take given our dramatically smaller operations for the next while, Chief Executive Officer Kaylin Rovinsco, excuse me if I got that wrong, said in a statement. Rovinsco and CFO Michael Russo will forego 100% of their salaries for the second quarter, the company said in a statement. Other senior executives will lose between 25 and 50% of their salaries, while members of the board will forego 25%. The airline says it will stop buying back its shares with the current crisis while the current crisis unfolds. The carrier has halted most of its international and U.S. routes in response to the global shutdown. So, job losses, lots of impact from the fallout, and still the taxes go up. Here's Pierre Poilievre, and he says, Parliament will need to be recalled to salvage the government's wage subsidy promise. Trudeau's announcement is not legal under the law, his government wrote last week. Morneau probably just realized that, and that's why he suddenly canceled his press conference. Trudeau said a company must have lost 30% of revenue to qualify for the wage subsidy. That is not in the law the government wrote. Trudeau said all employers will get help. But public companies, which are among the largest employers in Canada, are not eligible under the law his government wrote. Trudeau also said employers that cannot afford to pay 25% of the wage will still get the 75% subsidy. That's not in the law his government wrote. So Mr. Trudeau was announcing subsidies to employers and to employees. And while it's been widely criticized, and this is just one angle of criticism, there's been other angles of criticism. One was talking about how a lot of people who've just lost their jobs don't want to go into an interest-free loan because this is being formulated as a loan. So, I mean, that's problematic, right? Like, that's concerning if that's what this government is maneuvering people into, right? We'll give you help, but it'll be a loan. Will it be tax-free? Well, no. Oh, okay. So, and I mean, how do you, there are people who have to take this. There's no other option, right? So it's, I mean, and I don't know enough about the proposal and the law. I haven't had time to look at both. So please do your research. I don't know. I'm just telling you where the criticisms are coming from. I don't know if they're legitimate. Okay. So back to this. Global news and moving on. Global news, Ralph Goodale. Did you miss him? He was as useful then as he is now. Ralph Goodale named special advisor to feds on Iran plane crash. You know the Iranian plane crash, the one they shot down? That one? The one where if you consider it from Iran's point of view, and Iran doesn't recognize dual citizenship, there were only 2 Canadians on board. But if you look at it from Canada's point of view, there were 55, I think, Canadians on board, down from 150 odd. It's a very, very interesting situation. And they're refusing to still give over the black box. Remember all this? This was a big deal politically once upon a time. Okay. Former Liberal Cabinet Minister Ralph Goodale has been appointed, this wasn't a big deal, has been appointed a special advisor to the Trudeau government into Iran's downing of a commercial airliner in January. Shooting down. Iran's shooting down? Downing of it. Anyway, Prime Minister Justin Trudeau says Goodale will examine the lessons learned from the Ukrainian International Airlines Flight 752, as well as other air disasters, including the Ethiopian Airlines Flight 302 and Air India Flight 182. I believe the Air India flight was in 1987, and the lessons learned from the Flight 782, the Ukrainian Flight 782, don't fly over Iran when they're actively attacking a U.S. base and they think they can get away with shooting the plane down, or potentially don't fly with people the Iranian government want to see killed. Like, are those the lessons that they want to learn? Because, I mean, snip, snap, done. Like, what do you need Mr. Goodale to do? I'm not sure I understand. Iran's not giving the black box over. What is next? Because cooperation's not on the table, it looks like, right? Back to this. Goodale will support ongoing government efforts and come up with recommendations on tools and mechanisms needed to prevent further disasters. Is he talking about sending Trudeau over to Iran to kiss the mullah's hands again? Is that what he's talking? Are those the tools and mechanisms that they're referring to? I'm not sure. They could be. Back to the article. Goodale's appointment comes as Iran missed a deadline last week to surrender the flight recorder from the jetliner, which the Iranian military shot down on January 8th. Hey, at least they're blaming, like they're putting the blame squarely where it belongs. Like Iran did shoot the plane down. That's good. Back to the article. Iran's representative to the International Civil Aviation Organization in Montreal promised on March 11th to transfer the black boxes to Ukraine within 2 weeks to assist with its investigation into the crash, but as of March 26th, that has yet to occur. I don't know if, as of now, that has occurred, but I don't think so. As if it hasn't occurred last week, it's not likely to have occurred since. And this is updated yesterday, so presumably not. Moving on, this I just thought was kind of funny. This is a quick headline, and then a rebuttal via headline. CBC is reporting, Bill Blair asks prison parole heads to consider releasing some inmates to stop the spread of COVID-19. This is published yesterday at around 12:47, so noon, just afternoon. And this is York cop badly hurt during vicious sneak attack in Richmond Hill. This was published yesterday at 8:40 a.m. A police officer was seriously injured when he was viciously attacked, apparently without provocation, as he sat in his cruiser in the parking lot of a mall in Richmond Hill on Friday afternoon. A man in a white jumpsuit, who a police source says has been released from jail earlier in the day, attacked the officer at Hillcrest Mall, located at Yonge and 16th Avenue, which was closed because of the COVID-19 pandemic. And the Twitter chatter is talking about how this person was released from prison early because of the COVID-19 pandemic and worries about contagion. So isn't that, just interesting? Everything that the government does, every single misstep is just another misstep. And they don't seem to care or realize their missteps most of the time. It's really strange. Let's go back to less than a month ago. Okay, this is March 7th. Today is April 1st. And March 7th, everyone who has any authority in Canada was saying this: coronavirus risk remains low in Canada despite rise in cases, health officials say. And so they're talking about cases stood at 54, with the vast majority being reported in Ontario with 28 and British Columbia with 21. And so this is the 7th. 8 days later, we need to act now. Canada Public Health Officer raises COVID-19 pandemic threat from low risk to serious. So up until the 13th, I believe, or 14th, 15th, this is the 15th. On the 11th, the Deputy Prime Minister, Chrystia Freeland, said that this is going to get worse before it gets better. So the inaction, the slow action, the lack of proper advice has impacted Canada and continues to impact Canada. These professionals, these people in charge, are giving bad advice. And that was what my video was about yesterday. Here's March 30th. So we started on March 7th with the risk is low. We've got to March 15th and we need to act now. The threat is changed from low risk to serious. And 15 days later, no greater threat to Canada than COVID-19, military says. It's 24,000 troops activated to help fight it. And I've got one more little segment to do after this, but why the inaction from January to March 15th, March 11th, let's say? Why the inaction? They knew there was something big happening in the world. It's not like it was hidden. It was happening in real time. And they were calling people, they were saying, don't be racist. The stigma is worse than the virus. And now this is no greater threat to Canada than COVID-19? Why are these people still in their jobs if they're so bad at them? I don't understand. Back to this. Canada's military sees no greater threat to Canadians than the coronavirus pandemic and is mobilizing up to 24,000 troops to do whatever is needed. As the toll of COVID-19 climbs unabated across Canada, the force is rallying under the new mantra of General Jonathan Vance, Canada's Chief of Defence Staff: stay to fight it. Or stay fit to fight. Excuse me, stay to fight it. Stay fit to fight. On Monday, Defense Minister Harjit Sajjan outlined some of the Canadian Armed Forces plans for the pandemic and the mobilization order for up to 24,000 regular and reserved Armed Forces members to be ready for domestic needs. This includes 10 immediate reaction units within the Army to respond to local requests for assistance, such as providing humanitarian support, wellness checks, and natural disaster responses. The Navy is prepared to assist coastal communities. 50 patrols of the Canadian Rangers, Canada's Aboriginal Reserve Force, have been activated to full-time readiness for assistance, primarily in the Arctic and northern regions. When Canada needs their armed forces, they're always there, Sajjan said. During these unprecedented times, those who wear the uniform will be there for Canadians when called upon. We will provide local commanders the authority to be flexible in our assistance to ensure that local needs are met quickly. So far, the military has not received any formal requests for assistance, Sajjan said Monday. On Friday, the military said there had been no request for assistance, suggesting that some discussions of the need for military assistance may be underway. The military says the pandemic threat to the nation is real and significant. The Canadian Armed Forces does not see any greater threat to ourselves or Canadians than what has been described by the health authorities. Department of National Defense spokesperson Daniel LeBothier, I've got that wrong, told National Post on Friday. Sorry about that, Daniel. Okay, and moving on, I think this is really interesting. Global news is muddying the waters on face masks, and I don't think the waters are very muddy on this, and I'll be fast. I'll try and do this fast. Okay, so should you wear a face mask? Coronavirus prompts debate over effectiveness. There's no debate. Dr. Theresa Tam, Canada's Chief Public Health Officer, maintained in a press conference Monday that while face masks can cut down on the spread of the coronavirus when worn by someone already infected, it does little for healthy individuals. Wearing a face mask, she added, can even have some adverse effects, including giving people a false sense of confidence and increasing opportunities to touch their faces when adjusting or taking masks off. Even in a hospital setting, we find it's removing personal protective equipment that can actually lead to infections, Tam said. So if people try to use these measures, that they have to be really, really careful and wash their hands. Absolutely, that's the key. Bursky, who's also a fiction writer, I don't know why they include that, briefly retired from her career as a physician in December, but kept her medical license active. She returned to practicing in January as COVID-19 was wreaking havoc in Asia. Brysky, said, seeing how countries like Hong Kong and South Korea handled their own coronavirus outbreak, what she calls multi-pronged approach, gives her confidence that widespread use of masks could work in Canada and the US. Well, we only have 3 months experience with this virus. We've seen what can help in other countries, and we've seen what can be devastating to other countries, she said. Masks are a controversial thing right now in our country because we're trying to preserve a resource. There's worry that people will buy all the masks that are necessary for healthcare workers, and there's a risk to using masks in an inappropriate way that will put their own safety and the safety of others around them at risk. Okay, some health experts questioning the advice against wider use of masks to slow COVID-19. So, this is so long. Okay, well, here we go. Science Magazine has been trying for days to speak to elusive George Gao, head of China's Center for Disease Control and Prevention. When the magazine asked him if he could point to any mistakes that might explain why Western countries were struggling to flatten the coronavirus curve, he didn't miss a beat. Quote, the big mistake in the US and Europe, in my opinion, is that people aren't wearing masks, he said. You've got to wear a mask because when you speak, there are always droplets coming out of your mouth. Many people have asymptomatic or pre-symptomatic infections. If they are wearing face masks, it can prevent droplets that carry the virus from escaping and infecting others. The advice is contradicted by the World Health Organization, the Government of Canada, and federal public health officials like Chief Public Health Officer Theresa Tam. On its webpage, the WHO says that if you are healthy, you only need to wear a mask if you're taking care of a person with suspected COVID infection. Putting a mask on an asymptomatic person is not beneficial, obviously, if you're not infected, said Tam Monday. Only medical masks, such as those labeled N95, are designed and fitted to filter out particles that carry the COVID-19 virus. Other masks, such as surgical masks, are looser fitting and made of material that may reduce concentrations of some aerosol particles. A 2015 randomized clinical trial found that cloth masks, for example, did not block influenza and respiratory viruses and actually increased the rate of infection among healthcare workers, and even surgical masks blocked only slightly more than half of virus particles. So I find it interesting here. Is this the science they're referring to? Like, is this the science Ms. Tam is referring to? Because most people aren't using cloth masks for this. They're using N95 masks if they can get them. So is the advice to wear N95 masks if you can get them? Or is the advice to not wear masks because taking them off could reinfect you? Or is it because these cloth masks don't protect against influenza? So it's just interesting because what are they using to justify their claims and by extension their actions, right? Back to this. Dr. K.K. Cheng, director of the Institute of Applied Health Research at the University of Birmingham, in the UK, said that Tam's advice makes a dangerous assumption that an asymptomatic person is not a spreader. The important thing about this coronavirus is that some patients start to shed virus and become infectious even before they have symptoms, he said. In public health, a principle is we try to limit the source of harmful exposure rather than do mitigation if we can. Hand washing is a form of mitigation. I'm not suggesting in the least that people should stop washing hands. It's very important. But if you're out in public, in a supermarket or a subway, train, or on the bus, I think it makes a lot of sense for everyone to wear a mask. While officials in the West caution that explanations for Asian countries' greater success in controlling the pandemic are complex, officials from the countries themselves, such as Gao and Cheng, as well as Southern Korean specialists, often point to masks. Now some European governments are choosing to follow pro-mask policies. Okay, here's the mask curves, masks, no masks. It's sourced if you want to. It's just numbers, and it's the Johns Hopkins University source. And this is a good piece. It's very interesting. You should read it. It ties this whole thing together, and it's worth reading. I'll read it. On Saturday, the federal government announced passengers with COVID-19 symptoms would be barred from domestic air and train travel effective noon on Monday. It will be important for operators of airlines and trains to ensure that people who are exhibiting symptoms do not board, Prime Minister Justin Trudeau told reporters. Does that make sense? It's a question Canadians seem to be asking more and more about this country's coronavirus response. And for governments and public health officials, it's a dangerous one. All too often, the answer is no. What about buses? Many asked on social media of Saturday's announcement. Buses are provincial jurisdiction, the feds noted. What about ferries? Asked the Canadian Ferry Association. Good question. Ferries are Transport Canada's business. No answer yet. Mind you, transport operators don't yet have any guidance on how exactly they're supposed to ensure symptomatic people don't travel. It doesn't make much sense. And again, I say, this is me. If you've got a 15-year-old who's got a checklist who says, are you experiencing like flu-like symptoms? And somebody says no. I mean, what's the 15-year-old going to do? What's the 17-year-old going to do? What's the 25-year-old going to do? If somebody says, no, I'm not, let me onto the ferry. Good luck, right? If I'm walking onto the ferry and some 15-year-old kid says, no, sir, like you can't get on because of coronavirus, that's going to be a problem for them, right? For everyone. So, right? So you see how you see, and not to say that I'm special or anything like that, but everyone is special to themselves, right? And people will stand up for themselves. Back to this. Furthermore, we've been told over and over again that any measures carriers might implement, temperature sensors, for example, simply don't work. The positive prediction value of screening is essentially zero, the authors of a widely cited 2005 study reported, but based on Canada's airport experience with thermal scanners during the 2003 SARS outbreak. One of the authors of the study was Theresa Tam, who is now Canada's Chief Public Health Officer. She's the one doling out all the science that Trudeau insists underpins every single decision he and his ministers make. Our focus every step of the way is doing what is necessary at every moment based on the recommendations of experts, based on science, and doing what we can to keep Canadians safe, the Prime Minister said Monday. It's more than a bit awkward, but not as awkward as Federal Health Minister Patty Haydew's immortal March 13th dismissal of travel restrictions. Canadians think we can stop this at the border, but what we see is a global pandemic, meaning the borders measures actually are highly ineffective and in some cases can create harm. 5 days later, the borders slammed shut. And I'll also note that Taiwan has instituted border protections very effectively, and they have not had to shut down their economy or their schools. Failure on the Canadian government. Failure. Absolute abject failure. Back to this. We are to believe all of the positions above were supported by the same scientific experts. That doesn't make sense. Clearly, the experts supported the more lenient measures, and then politics intervened. Appearing before the Health Committee on January 29th, Tam strongly dismissed the notion even of having all travelers from COVID-19 hot zones isolate for 14 days. She warned against stigmatizing communities. She very nearly suggested we couldn't implement travel restrictions even if we wanted to. Right now, the WHO does not recommend travel bans, she warned the committee. We are signatory to the international health regulations and will be called to account if we do anything different. The WHO still recommends against travel restrictions, even to and from especially affected countries. No one seems to be calling us to account. It could well be that by the time Canadians started calling for travel restrictions, it was already too late to implement useful ones. That's what research generally concludes, but research also acknowledges the political inevitability of cracking down on travel. They just make too much sense to too many people. Federal ministers and public health officials recklessly undermine themselves by so forcefully rejecting measures that made so much sense to so many people. Yes. Indeed, Tam is asking a lot of Canadians to set aside a lot of common sense right now. There is ample evidence that face masks, even homemade ones, can provide significant protection to the uninfected, but Tam warns only of the potential pitfalls. Masks can provide a false sense of security, lead to more face touching, or make us forget to wash our hands. Putting a mask on an asymptomatic person is not beneficial, she said at her Monday press conference. That makes sense to a lot of medical professionals. A lot of regular people, however, are pretty sure they know how to wash their hands and not touch their faces. When officials say masks don't work, a lot of regular people hear, quote, we have inexcusable shortages of masks for frontline healthcare workers because Trudeau sent 17,000 tons of our equipment to China in February, so please give us your masks. When officials say, quote, you don't need to be tested, they're likely to hear, we have, quote, we have an inexcusably few tests available and not enough lab capacity to process the ones we have. Yep. On Sunday, Tam sternly advised Canadians against retreating to any rural properties they may own. These places have less capacity to manage COVID-19, she told reporters in Ottawa. That makes sense, as do concerns about straining off-season supply chains, but let's say you're extremely careful, you're symptom-free, you pack a week's worth of groceries, drive 90 minutes or 2 hours, non-stop to your cottage, camp, farm, or chalet. and don't interact with a single other human being. How dangerous, how irresponsible could that really be? If the cottage is good enough for Sophie Gregory Trudeau and the kids who beetled off to Harrington Lake on Sunday, some people might conclude it's good enough for them. Public health officials want to prevent people from asking such questions, from making excuses for themselves and hoping the maximum number of people will take the maximum precautions. They need smart people to forsake relatively low-risk things in order to counterbalance all the dumb people who do the high-risk things no matter what they're told. None of the measures will ever make perfect sense in every single situation. There are calls to collective sacrifice for the greater good, but they can't keep changing on the fly with no explanation other than the experts got more worried overnight and remain credible. On Monday, Trudeau declined to even say he regretted not moving quicker on measures he now insists are essential. Does that make sense? No, that doesn't make sense. And thank you for watching. This has been a long one, so I apologize. And check out CanadaPoly.com, check out CanadaReport.co, and have a wonderful, wonderful day. And wash your hands.